All right, goats. Goats are such a pleasure to have around the farm here, but boy, are they escape artists. They can get out of some fencing. So I'm going to take you through a couple of things that we have learned over the last year and a half of having the goats out here, and ducks. Apparently, they just go wherever they want. And we'll talk a little about fencing. So all the pastures that were out here when we bought the house were mainly for horses. They did have goats out here also, but they had hot wire. You'll see the yellow insulators. They had electric fence around the top, and mainly they kept ponies and horses and things like that out here, hence the really tall sheds and things. And this woven wire works great for that. There's really nothing wrong with it. But it really isn't the best thing for goats, especially these dwarf breeds, and especially when they have horns like ours do. None of ours have been dehorned. We're going to keep these guys. They're not 4-H or anything like that. So we wanted to keep their horns, which we feel are there for a reason. They're a form of defense for them, and they also are kind of a heat radiator. So they can get their heads through these squares, and especially with horns, with or without horns, they can get their heads stuck. With horns especially, they'll get their horns through, and then they get hooked, and they can't pull it back out. And then they get all kinds of trying to fiddle around in here, and they actually get their heads tucked back up through another one, and they can really get hurt. We've had to really keep a close eye on them. You'll see these wires actually kind of slide. If they push them hard enough, you'll see like this square is bigger than this square. So the woven wire really isn't the best thing for goats. This is what we have and what we're going to have to deal with here for our pastures until we can replace it. But what we would replace all of this with is what's called goat and sheep fencing. It is a lot more expensive, but it has a 4-inch square, so they can't fit their heads in between there, and which keeps them quite a bit safer, and you don't have to worry about that. The other problem we have, and you'll see I have some temporary fixes out here, throwing some posts in and things like that, because this was for horses before, they kept the wire way up off the ground. Look at that. Some of these areas, there's a big gap underneath the fence. Well, they'll lift that right up, these goats, and they'll slide right underneath it. And that's what they've been doing. And they've been getting out. They don't really go anywhere. They just get out, and then they're like, oh, hey, I'm out. But they do like to eat my apple trees. Look at that. These are only a year old, and I don't know, that one's gonna suffer. So they are destructive. The goats will eat all of your bushes and flowers and all the things you don't want them to eat. So we want to keep them in the pasture. That's the idea. They have plenty of food out here and water, so they shouldn't want to get out, right? But they do. They want to check everything out. They want to explore. Goats are also climbers. They have no problem climbing on the thinnest of branches and wires and things. These posts here I added last year. There was a stretch from that post all the way to that post with no support in between, and so that fence was real bouncy, and they would jump and climb right over that, even though it was fairly tight. They can stand right on those little wires and climb up and over if it's leaning enough. So I suggest that you put your posts, I like to put mine every about 10 feet. That seems to be a pretty good range. You can keep the fence tight enough, and make sure you use a fence puller to pull the wire really tight. Whether you're using this type of fencing or the goat and sheep fencing, you want it to be tight. The tighter the better. The pallet hay feeder has been working very well. They've been enjoying that. So while we're out here, let's fix some of this fencing. What I need to do is pop these staples off these posts right here, and then just lower this right down to the ground. I want to do that in as many places as possible along here so that we can get that wire tight to the ground. So one of the first things I learned when I was out here working on fencing last year was when you're dealing with these staples, the one tool that you just have to have is one of these fence tools, fencing tools. This is a Channel Lock brand, made in the United States. I think it has a lifetime warranty. this is a great tool. I let mine sit in the greenhouse, got rusty this year, but still in good shape. This will help pull staples, hammer staples, cut wire, bend wire, probably a bunch of other things I don't even know how to use on this thing yet. But it's absolutely necessary that you have one of these, especially if you're going to be pulling these staples out. I mean, using a screwdriver or any other way is absolutely silly. This thing will pull these staples right out with almost no effort. And I'll reuse all these, of course. This post looks like it's about rotted right through, so it looks like I'll be replacing some of these posts this year too, but for now this will be a good fix. I bought this on Amazon. As always, I say this, I feel like I say this in every video, I buy just about everything on Amazon. I got a good deal on this, and I'll put a link in the description to it. So if you're gonna be doing fencing, pick one up. It's just another wise thing to do is to get good fence posts. You know, you're going to be tempted when you're putting fencing in to go cheap and look for the cheapest post you can get. Get something that's a good treated post. You know, you don't want to go with the real thin ones. I mean, this stuff hasn't been here that long, and it's already just about rotted through. And that just means you got to go and you got to take all the staples out. You got to redo all your whole fencing. And that's not something that anybody wants to do. You don't want to go back and have to do a job twice. You know, space your fence posts apart a little bit more if you got to cut costs. I mean, you know, try to go 12 feet or something, save yourself a couple bucks, but get good posts. It's just, you can always add a post in between, but to go back and have to dig posts out, man, what a pain. So that's what I'm gonna end up having to do with all these. So when I get goat and sheep fencing, I'll probably have to just redo this whole pasture, new posts and everything. And this is just unfortunately just poor work. Whenever I get staples, I always get these barbed staples. These are another made in the USA product. I get these locally, usually TSC, Family Farm and Home has these. Any of your fence or lumber stores, things like that, probably would have these. But you want to get good ones, and I always recommend getting the barbed ones. So I don't know if you can see these have these barbs on them. That's just going to keep those things sunk in there real good, and you don't have to worry about things pulling out. So I always reuse staples if I can. These are the staples that were in there. They're a little shorter and rusted, but they'll still work for now. But any new fencing that I put in is always gets these. It's one of the biggest assets on our farm is the pastures, the fencing. You don't think about it. Oh, just throw up fencing here, throw up fencing there. To do it right, to do fencing well, it's actually pretty expensive. The bill's gonna come due on this fence, and we're gonna have to get in here and redo this thing all right. So put that on the project list. But for now, this will keep the goats from walking underneath the fence. There we go.
You got it? You got it!
I could do that.
Why are you making that noise? It's just annoying.
So for these guys out here, the type of fencing that I have is kind of a multi-use fencing. This is welded wire. This is basically just welded on each one of these joints. So these are real small squares. I think they're 2-inch by 4-inch squares. So this is good for chickens, ducks, things like that. They can't get through it. I also really like that it's more rigid, and if these posts were all straight and everything in here, it would actually look fairly nice. This is nice because it's multi-purpose, so I can have the chickens out here. This is kind of our barnyard, and then I also have the goats out here. Now the one thing I can say is if you're going to use this type of fencing with goats, you want to make sure you have some kind of a board on the inside. What happens is the goats like to stand up on it. When you come up to the fence and things like that, they'll stand up, and they'll put their hooves right on these wires if you don't have a board there. And what'll happen, like he's doing right now.
Just like him doing.
So what they'll do is they'll stand on the wires instead, and they'll break those welds off. And so you want to have some kind of a board in there for them to kind of stand up on. Welded wire is not the ideal fencing for goats, but it is good for multi-purpose like this. Look at all the sticks. This was a big Christmas tree and a bunch of evergreen branches that was thrown in here in the winter, and they look at what they did to that stuff. They took every bit of bark off those trees.
Whoa.
They ate all the needles, they ate it all. They love this stuff. It's real good for them too. So out here, this is my next project coming up. The pigs are going to go out into this pasture. It's a real big pasture. Fence posts are in. These are newer fence posts. They look like they're in better condition. But this is what happens to fencing over time. I mean, this is all woven wire. It was probably pretty decent fencing at some point, but it's all rusted out and needs to be all replaced. So this is a big chunk of fence here. I don't know how big this pasture is, but it's big. So this is the pasture that will eventually house our guinea hogs, the pigs. They will be bred and raised out here on all this pasture. This is grass, and there's nut trees out here and all kinds of things, so this will be great for them. But this fencing all needs to be replaced, so I will be doing some electric fencing along the ground for the pigs. There's a lot of options out there for fencing. There's portable poultry type fencing and nylon electric stranding with poly poles and stuff that you can put in and take down, and electric fencing is a real great tool for portable fencing and things like that. I personally kind of prefer, setting up permanent pastures and using fencing that's going to be good all around multi-use, but that's not always the case, and that doesn't always work. Here, one thing I've learned is whatever you have around and whatever you have available to you, whatever works is what's going to work. And we don't always have the money and time and resources to re-fence an entire mile of pasture with the optimal fencing that we want. So a lot of it's patch jobs. You fix things, you keep animals in, and that's the point. But from what I've learned, especially with goats, the goat and sheep fencing is going to be our next purchase. That's going to be the next fencing that we use on the pastures that are specific for our goats. It just is the best fencing for them. It's not great for chickens though, because usually it's in only 4-foot sections, and that's just not tall enough. Chickens will fly over that. So you got to give and take there and figure out what you're going to be using the pastures for, and try to make your best choice. But over this next few months, spring and summer, we're going to be investing in fencing and fixing and mending fencing and doing everything we can to get our animals spread out and out onto their natural habitats. That's going to be our big goal early this year. So I'm going to take you guys along for all of that, and we'll see how well things work, especially with the pigs. Pigs are another one. They're big, they're heavy, and they can get through things. So they're a whole nother animal to try to contain. But so stay tuned for all kinds of good animal fun coming up as we raise and breed and expand our herds and flocks here on the SSL family farm. I love animals, and we love to just have them and care for them here, don't we? Raising our baby chicks in the house, and it's a lot of fun out here. So as always, guys, subscribe to the channel if you want to follow along. Lots of good stuff coming up. Thumbs up on today's video if you enjoyed and maybe found something interesting or useful. Hopefully this helps somebody out who's looking at getting fencing. You find some more information out. I know for me, the best thing that I could do is get online and watch other people do how they handle fencing before I got started on things, and you learn a lot. So hopefully help somebody out. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Have a good one.